Hello, this is a video for IME 315, Financial Decision Making for Engineers at Cal Poly San Luis Obispo. This particular video is on two evaluation techniques, payback and net present value. So when we talk about the 5 topics in this class, this video is under investment analysis. So there's what we're going to talk about today is a calculation of payback, calculation of discounted payback, calculation of net present value, salvage value, and net present value in stock price. So if we look at payback, if you remember from the previous video on evaluations, this is the number of years until you get your investment back. And you're answering the question, when do I get my investment back? So if this is the example where you invest $2,000 and then you have $1,000 a year for 5 years and then $500 in the 6th year, the question about when you're getting your money back is actually in 2 years. So you make $2,000 investment and in 2 years you get that money back. So that would be the answer for this particular problem. One of the problems with this is, though, that it's often a little bit more difficult to calculate the payback. So we're going to look at this example that has sort of erratic cash flows and see how to do that calculation. So the way that I recommend doing it is to set up a table where you have columns of the time period, the cash flow, and then cumulative cash flow. So you can see I've taken that cash flow diagram and converted it into this table. And the cumulative cash flow in time period 0 is the investment amount. In time period 1, it's the investment amount less the $1,200 you get back, and then the next year less the $500. And you can see sometime between the 3rd and the 4th year, you get the investment back because the cumulative cash flow goes to 0. And the way you figure that out is you say, well, if it happens, and it's a little bit after time period 3, and I get $1,000 in time period 4, and I only need 300. So that means it's 0.3 of the way through the year. So the payback is 3.3 years. Now let's look at the problems with this. Is it doesn't consider anything about time value of money that we've been sort of basing a lot of our decision making on in engineering economy, and also it doesn't take into account anything that happens after the payback period. So it doesn't consider anything that happens in time period 5 or 6, and that could be a problem. So what people have developed is, at least to take care of the time value of money process, is we use discounted payback. And in this case, we take the cash flows and we discount them back to time period 0, and then we calculate cumulative cash flows. So in this table, I have 4 columns now. One is the time period, the cash flow, and then the discounted cash flow. The discounted cash flow number is going to use this equation, P is equal to F divided by 1 plus I to the n. So in the first time period, even though I have $1,200, I'm discounting it back to time period 0 by dividing it by 1.1. So the equivalent of $1,200 in period 1, the equivalent value is 1,090 in period 0. And I do that for all of them. So like the 6th year, I take $500 and divide it by 1.1 to the 6th. And then I do a calculation of cumulative cash flow. And I can see it happens sometime between the 4th and the 5th year. And if I do the calculation in a very similar terms, it's around 5.9 years in a discounted cash flow method. But this still doesn't take into account cash flows that occur after the payback period. One thing I want you to notice is that in this cash flow, cumulative present value of cash flows, the answer is 344. The net present value is 344 at the end of the project. Now, this is exactly the same calculation that we do when we do net present value. Now, we're going to talk about that. So net present value is the concept of taking all cash flows and bring them back to time period 0. And one of the things that's good about this is it shows actually the making an investment, what it will do to the value of the company. So we're going to go through this calculation. So there's a couple ways that people refer to this. Net present value is the way I usually say it, but some people just say present value and some people say present worth. So just know that if you're asked about that particular thing, it's the same thing. And you calculate the present value of all cash flows. And if it's a single investment option, if the net present value is greater than 0, then you should do the project. If it's multiple mutually exclusive alternatives, then you choose the highest net present value or the lowest cost if they're all costs. And one thing that's real important in these evaluation techniques is you need to have equal lives. So let's go through this particular one. We're going to look at what's the sum of all the future cash flows over the time period, over the 6-year time period we have here, and that's the net present value. So I'm just going to discount them all back to time period 0 by dividing by 1 plus I to the n, and that gives us a net present value of 344. Now you remember this is the same cash flow I used when I was using discounted payback, and the cumulative cash flow at the end was 344. And it's the same exact calculation. We discounted every back to time period 0 and added that up. And because 344 is greater than 0, this is a good investment, and we would say you should do it. So what if we're comparing investments? So we have this top one, we just calculated at 344, and then the second one, we're going to do the same calculation and get 481. Now we can say, well, the equivalent time period 0 value of the first one is 344, and of the second one is 481. And we prefer 481 over 344, so we're going to go ahead and do the second option. The second alternative, and that's just how you use net present value to decide between options. One of the things that we need to remember, which I said before, is that the alternatives need to be the same time period. So in this case, we have two alternatives and they're different time periods, and that's problematic. So what we're going to do is we're going to make them equal time periods by adding a salvage value at the end of the second alternative. Now this salvage value is something you need to figure out. Like we talked about before when we talked about salvage value, it's like the liquidation value, in this case in time period 4. And then in most of the problems I give you, it will tell you, you will go ahead and let you know what the salvage value is in the 4th year. We're going to go ahead and calculate the present value of this first alternatives. And if I write out the equation, this particular present value is 117. And then for the second option, now that we have given it a salvage value, we have the net present value of 462. And because 462 is greater than 117, we will decide on using the second option. And that's just simply how you do present value calculations. One of the interesting things and the useful things about net present value is that it has a direct relationship to stock price. If you make an investment that are valuable, increase the value of the company, your stock price will go up. Now there's a method of valuing the stock market that's called discounted cash flow method, and it says that the current stock price is equal to the net present value of all future cash flows. So if you look at the cash flow diagram there, on top there I have the dividends that are received plus the future stock price, and if we calculate the net present value of all of that, we can figure out what the current stock price is. We also know that the total equity value of a firm is equal to the stock price times the number of shares. If you remember when we did calculations on stock price, this gave us an equity value. We also know that the asset value is equal to liabilities plus equities. And if we increase the value of the assets by adding good investments and liabilities mean the same, then the stock price will increase. And this is an important reason for using net present value as an evaluation technique. It's also very important for the company to manage their stock price. And so to understand the relationship between net present value and stock price is useful. So this particular video covers 2 evaluation techniques that fall under the topics that we cover in investment analysis.